Hello, and a big warm welcome to the Guardian Doulas Diary podcast. My name is Angela Doulas, or Angie. I'm your host and the founder of Guardian Doula. I'm a certified birth and postpartum doula and childbirth educator based on Sydney's Northern Beaches and serving women and their families all throughout Sydney. This podcast is an honest collection of the stories and experiences of birthing women and the professionals that support them to empower, equip, and inspire us all. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, here we are again for another episode. Now, today's title might sound a little bit hectic. Why, you're wrong about doulas. Oh my gosh, I know it sounds pretty intense, but I can almost guarantee you that you'll probably find at least one of these things that I'm about to go over you are wrong about. So I encourage you to just listen with an open mind. Maybe you do know all of this. Again, I'd be surprised if you do, because I hear these things from even like the most informed people that I speak to. I think to myself, misinformation. But look, let's just get ready to be honest with ourselves. If your perspective has been a bit off and you listen to this and you go, oh my gosh, this hits home, that's a great thing, because now you're one step closer to a better birth experience, right? Knowledge is power, as we all know, so I'm not going to sugarcoat any of this stuff because sugarcoating does no one any favors. So I'm very excited to get into this. But before we dive in any further, I want to mention something very exciting. At the end of this episode, I'm going to make an announcement that I have been itching to make for like weeks. So make sure you stick around for that because you're not going to want to miss it. And I cannot wait to let you in on what I've been working on. Okay, back onto our topic though. So the more we understand about doulas and their role, the more we help ourselves along the way to a better birth, because the research shows that doulas improve birth outcomes, which I'll kind of get to at the end. I'm going to go over a big fat list of what doula support like actually will do for you. So we are going to start kind of with an overview of just a big fat list of like all of the misconceptions that are quite common that I hear that cost them big time in their births. And let's make sure this misinformation doesn't cost you because you get to choose, right? I hate this narrative of like, oh, we have no control over birth, so you may as well just like let it happen to you. No, we do have control over birth. I think it's a cop-out to be like, well, we have no control. I could make a whole separate podcast episode actually about all of the ways that we can control our birth, because there are heaps of them. And obviously, like, yes, there's a lot that is outside of our control, but I've been doing this for a good few years. I've had 4 of my own babies, and I can tell you firsthand that I have seen, and the research proves as well, how untrue and unhelpful that narrative is. But this is all a story for another day. Doulas, let's stay on topic. What are the myths? Okay, here's my little overview. Here's like some general myths, and then I'm going to get into misconceptions around like doulas and partners, doulas and midwives, and then some things around the cost as well, because I think those are some kind of hurdles that people seem to wrestle with quite commonly. So some general misconceptions. One of them is you don't need a doula if it's not your first baby, or this is your first baby, so you might have a great birth and not need one. We're just going to like see how we go this time, and then if it's really that bad, we'll get a doula next time around. Another thing that I hear is that you don't need a doula if you're birthing in hospital, or I also hear you don't need a doula if you're birthing with a known private midwife that you've chosen. Both of those aren't true, but I'll explain why after the overview. Another thing that I hear very often is that you don't need a doula if you're well informed. Also, if you can hear my little baby in the background, she is at home with me today. She's a little bit sick. So I've got little sicky girl next to me on the couch as I'm doing this episode. So I hope she's not going to be too loud. We'll see how we go. But yes, this idea that you don't need a doula if you're well informed. Also, I hear, I don't need a doula because I'm not scared of birth. I'm excited for it. I hear, oh, I don't need a doula because I've had a pretty uncomplicated pregnancy. Like everything's going well. I don't really foresee having to navigate any complications or interventions. I'm just planning for a straightforward natural birth. I also hear people say like, oh, it's too early or it's too late in my pregnancy. People think as well, like, oh, I'll just learn everything in my midwife appointments or in my birth classes, so I don't need a doula. And then to kind of touch on some partner ones, okay? So all the time I hear, well, I don't need a doula because I have a supportive partner. You know, like I'm not a single mom, I just don't need a doula. Or even single moms might say like, yeah, I'm just going to have my mum with me or my sister or whatever, so I don't need a doula. I've got kind of a supportive person with me. Another one that I get all the time is that the partner wants to be the main support. And then kind of the last two that are really big when it comes to partners is that people say, oh no, I just want my partner and no one else. Like I just want it to be me and him. I want it to be really intimate. And then lastly, I hear like, oh, my partner's so informed. Like he's attended all the classes, read all the books. Like he's all over it. We don't need a doula. That's the partner ones. Then some misconceptions or some like common things that I hear around midwives. People will say like, oh, well, I've got a midwife, so I don't need a doula. Like I don't need both. My midwife will support me. And then I also hear like, oh, I already have continuity of care. I'm in the MGP program, so I don't need a doula. You absolutely do. And I'll tell you why when we get to kind of breaking each of these down. The next little thing to touch on when it comes to like midwives or providers is that I hear people say like, oh, I'm just nervous. I don't really want to have a doula in case they create like tension in the birth space when they're advocating for me. That's a really bad idea to not have a doula because you are scared of tension in the birth space. And we'll unpack that because that's a big one. So I'll talk about that. And then the last two are like when providers kind of tell you that you don't need a doula. These are big, big, big red flags. Sometimes I'll hear like, oh, my provider said don't hire a doula because sometimes they can just be difficult and like they're a bit unnecessary. They can just be a bit like, you know, over the top. They make the birth a bit more complicated, like having an extra set of opinions in the room or whatever. Or like, oh, my provider's really supportive of what my preferences are. They are happy for me to just like have the birth that I want. I've told them all of my preferences and they are totally on board. And they've said like, don't get a doula, we'll support you. Bad idea. Bad idea. If you have a provider that is saying that to you, I would say that is a massive, massive red flag. And yes, we'll unpack them, but big red flag. And then lastly, I think cost is a big one. So people think like, oh, you know, they're just a luxury. They're not really a necessity. They're just way too expensive and they're not going to really like actually change your birth outcomes. So they're probably not worth investing in. So those are kind of the common misconceptions that I think are very rampant out there in the world. And they're all false. So if I've said any of those and you're like, yeah, sounds reasonable, oh my goodness, I'm so glad you're here. Because those are all false, and dangerous things to be thinking. So let's unpack them, all right? Starting with kind of those general ones that I mentioned first. Let's start with this idea that you don't need a doula if it's not your first baby. Like, I've had a baby already, been there, done that. I know what to expect now. I don't need a doula. Big mistake, okay? One easy birth does not guarantee an easy subsequent birth or subsequent births, plural. Also, when I say easy, like birth is not easy. So don't get me wrong. When I say like, oh, an easy birth, what I mean by that is like a relatively straightforward, simple, uncomplicated birth where you had a positive experience. I don't mean that the birth itself was easy. Oh, there goes baby. But let's break this down because I hear it all the time, right? Oh, you know, my first birth was pretty straightforward. It was easy. It was all good. Like now that I know that my body just responds really well to labor, I don't need a doula. Honey, that could not be further from the truth. I don't want to like fearmonger, but one great birth doesn't necessarily mean that everything's going to be smooth sailing the next time. What if your baby is in a funky position next time? Right? What if your next labor is like crazy long? Or what if you have complications that come up that you didn't have to navigate in your first labor and birth, and so you're in uncharted territory? Like, these are all things, that's just a couple of examples, but those are all examples that I have seen happen to my clients and to some of my best friends who, you know, could have prevented a lot of strife had they had a doula. And the people who did have doulas in these situations had way better outcomes. So I think just be careful to shut off and go into like, oh, well, everything's fine mode after one good experience, because you can't assume that that's always how it's going to go, because it might not. Then the next one is, well, this is my first baby, you know, I might have a great birth and not need one, so I'm just going to see how I go this time, and then like if it was really that bad, next time we'll hire the doula. Okay, also a terrible idea. I just don't see the value in taking that risk. I mean, as I said before, like even if you do have a really great birth the first time around, it doesn't guarantee you a great experience next time around. So this idea of like testing it out on the first baby makes absolutely no sense. I posted the other day on my stories, like when it comes to birth, there is no dress rehearsal. Like it's the real deal, you know, on the day. You're straight into the real thing. There's no practice. So I think doing this like test run thing is a really bad idea. And I can tell you a lot of stories about women who had this mindset and massively, massively regretted it. Like they come out of their births and they go, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? Like that was so silly. So I think, you know, it just makes no sense. Like why take that risk? I think with a birth trauma rate that is literally 1 in every 3 women, that's 33%, right? That to me seems like a really unreasonable risk to take. Like even just one little example to kind of get you thinking, we consent to inductions of labor knowing that they are so risky and that they are huge like medical procedures, but we consent to inductions of labor because we are worried about the risk of stillbirth jumping up from at 37 weeks, it sits around 0.021%. Versus around 42 weeks, the risk sits at 0.108%. So that change in the risk of stillbirth, like it's literally still at worst a 0.1% chance, which is, you know, relatively low. But a 33% chance in birth trauma, we go, oh, I'll just risk it. Like that's wild. That is so wild. So I just think like those are pretty not great odds, like 1 in 3, you know, that's high. I just don't think it's worth playing games with that and risking it. The other one that I want to unpack is that you don't need a doula if you're birthing in hospital. So much I could say about this one. I think women birthing in hospitals need doulas even more than those who are birthing at home, because the odds are that you're not going to have continuity of care. And so you'll need so much more advocacy for your wishes and your preferences, because the reality is that in a hospital, you are more often than not treated as more of a number, and the conveyor belt of intervention is hugely prevalent. You literally can't deny it. The statistics speak for themselves. So anyone who disagrees with this, you are just blatantly in denial. Like, I'm sorry, there's no other way of saying it. The birth trauma rates are higher. Again, you can't deny that. If you go and read the birth trauma inquiry report that just happened and went through Parliament, you will see this is a fact. You know, like just look at the statistics. That's all I'll say for that. Women birthing in hospital need doulas all the more. But I will also unpack this other thing that I hear of like, oh, I don't need a doula because I'm birthing with a known private midwife. This one is also false for a different reason, right? You best believe your midwife cannot provide 24, 48, whatever number of hours of birth support to you. She won't do it because it's not safe. If she has been awake for that long, she's not going to be able to make sound judgments and keep you and your baby safe. Early labor very often takes a heck of a long time. And I think a lot of women assume that they won't need support during early labor. But girl, let me tell you, about 90% of my clients call me in very early labor, feeling like it's already very intense and needing support. Like, early labor is still labor, and it can be full on. I can seriously count on one hand. Like, I'm sitting here trying to think of the number of women who have only needed me or wanted my support when it's like, you know, active labor hits. And I cannot think of 5. Like, I literally can't, and I've been doing this 5 years. So, I mean, let that kind of put into a little bit of perspective that, yeah, as I said, early labor is still labor. And your midwife absolutely can't be coming over to your house and supporting you in early labor. She just can't. It's not safe, and she can't do it. There's a midwife that I know really well who literally, for this reason alone, she's like, if you're going to hire a doula for any reason, like even just do it for this. Like, doulas have so many benefits, so many, but if it's just this, just do it. Like, that is reason enough to hire a doula. The other one that I hear is that you don't need a doula if you're well informed. And I'm just going to be super straight up. I think the fact that you think you're too informed to need a doula shows me that you are not even near informed enough. I am as informed as they come, right? I have given birth to 4 babies myself. I have seen many births in many different care providers, many different, models of care, I should say, and then with many different care providers. I have studied birth. I know birth. I live and breathe birth for a job. And I can tell you, I would never give birth again without a doula. I have seen too much. I know too much. And I am just aware of how crucial doulas are. It's so funny. I get emails all the time, literally from midwives about to have babies. And they're like, hey, I'm a midwife, so I know how the maternity system works, and I know that I need a doula. I just think that explains it. Like, if that doesn't explain it and you think, oh, I'm too informed, I don't need a doula, you are so wrong. And I genuinely hope that you will reconsider, because that's a super dangerous mindset. The reality is that you don't know what you don't know, and if you think you don't need a doula because you're so informed, it's just not true. And I hope that doesn't sound harsh. I say it out of love because I just know how dangerous that mindset is. Like, just be careful. Don't be arrogant. Don't get arrogant. I think if doulas and midwives themselves know that they need these things in place, then I just don't know why someone who doesn't do this every day for a living thinks that they know enough to just navigate it on their own. I also hear I don't need a doula because I'm not scared of birth. I'm excited for it. Okay, what I would say to that is, that's amazing that you're excited and that you're not scared, but that's not the full puzzle. That's one piece, and that's a great piece. It's amazing that you're not scared and nervous. But let's use the example of an Olympic athlete, right? They don't say to their coach, oh, don't worry, coach, I'm actually all sorted. I'm pretty excited. I'm not too nervous, so I don't need you to come to the Olympics with me. Thanks for everything, but I'm all good. I'm going to take this one on myself. That would be completely ridiculous, right? If an athlete did that, you'd be like, what? What are you doing? Just because you're not nervous doesn't mean you don't need your coach with you on the big day. That doesn't make any sense. So don't do that with your birth. Not being scared is one thing, and that's a great thing, but it's not everything. The other thing I hear is that, oh, it's too early or too late in my pregnancy. I think it's never too early or late. Just make it happen. There is bound to be someone with availability, even if you have left it super late. Just ask around, you might get lucky. I actually have had a woman contact me before she was 39, 40 weeks, pretty late in the piece. And I was having a quieter month, so I could take her on, and it worked out great. But having said that, it's also never too early, because that scenario that I described just then is an exception. I'm usually booked out quite far in advance, and I'll have women contact me when they're literally just done the pregnancy test, and they've called me up straight away before they've even waited for their husband to get home from work and told their husband that they're pregnant, because that's how far in advance doulas book out sometimes. So while it's always still worth a try if it's later on in the piece, definitely the earlier the better. Then let's talk about this idea that you'll learn everything in your midwife appointments or your birth classes, so you don't need a doula. Okay, I hate to say it, but you won't. Your midwife appointments are in and out, okay? Your midwife appointments usually will go something like this. Hi, how are you? Oh, yep, good. Let's check your blood pressure. Oh, good. Okay, that's all fine. Baby's moving? Yep, great. Okay, let's measure your fundal height. Oh, yep, fundal height looks good. Your blood results look fine. Okay, next. That is how midwife appointments go. Obviously, this is very different if you have a private midwife, but the majority of women, and when I say majority, it's 97%, right, of us who are going through the hospital system. So that is the most common experience. And so your midwife doesn't have time to educate you during your appointments. They just don't have the capacity for it. And then as for birth classes, I mean, I will say if you're doing your birth classes through the hospital, forget it. Pretty much every hospital birth class that I have attended, it's literally just, you'll know every policy, but you won't know everything about physiological birth or how your pelvis works and how to optimize it. And even if you attend like private birth classes, as in not through your hospital, which I do recommend everyone does attend private birth classes, you're still not going to be able to remember absolutely everything. Like, you're in labor. We actually want the thinking part of your brain to be totally switched off and the more primitive part of your brain to be on, right? And you might be thinking like, oh, but my partner will remember. Yeah, maybe they will, but maybe they won't. And often they don't. I love the analogy of like a first aid course, right? Where you attend the first aid course and you're like, yes, doctors A, B, C, D. First we assess the danger and then this and then that. But like when someone is in front of you bleeding and there's guts everywhere, sorry to be gory, that is a pretty tough thing to, recall how to manage if you're not doing it every day. Most people do freeze in those situations and they don't know what to do. You forget everything. Like, you're like, what was I meant to do? Where do I start? Or maybe you remember where to start, but then you're like, okay, what was the next thing? What do I do? And I mean, thank goodness for paramedics, right? Because they do this every day. They are so equipped for these things. And I feel like doulas are birth paramedics. That's like the perfect analogy. I'm so proud of myself. I just thought of that on the spot. We are not fazed by the blood and the guts, right? We see it all the time. So when your wife is screaming at the top of her lungs and yelling, help me, and crying and, whatever else she might be doing, the doula is like, yep, this is birth. This is normal. This is safe. Let's try some techniques to help you manage the intensity of this. We're not going to just panic and freeze and be like, I can't remember anything. Whereas for a lot of partners, like, that's a very normal response. It makes sense that you remember like some of the things that you learn in your birth classes, but not necessarily everything, right? And I think too, like, a doula's knowledge and experience and understanding is so much deeper anyway than what you can kind of get out of one birth class. Like, if you are working with a doula who has, been doing this for years and years and years and has seen many, many, many births, she's got so much more that she can like draw on and use to support you guys than what you would have gotten out of one birth class. So even if you do happen to remember absolutely everything and you're this like incredible wizard who somehow, remembers all the things, even then, like, you would hugely benefit from a doula because her knowledge would be even deeper and even wider. Okay, next, let's talk about some kind of misconceptions or some things that come up around partners, because this is huge. And I would probably actually go so far as to say that, like, this is one of the most common obstacles, or one of the most common things that people kind of count themselves out of having a doula because of. So let's start with like, I don't need a doula because I have a really supportive partner. Okay, your partner, whether this is your husband, your boyfriend, your mum, your sister, your friend, whoever it is that's going to be supporting you throughout your birth, they might be beautiful and so supportive and like the kindest, most amazing person that you've ever met. I hope they are, if they're coming to your birth. But are they an expert in birth? Like, can they pick up on and interpret different contraction patterns? Can they tell just by your sounds and movements what stage of labor you're in? Can they pick up on if baby's in a bit of a funky position? And if yes, great, but do they know how to encourage bub into a better position? And if yes, great, but what method are they going to use to do it? Like, what if method 1 and 2 don't work? Will they be able to then work out why method 1 and 2 haven't worked? And then do they have other techniques up their sleeve? Does your partner, mum, sister, whoever understand the ins and outs of the very complex and nuanced maternity system? And do they know about the different complications and interventions and how to make helpful decisions if those things come up? Do they know how to advocate for you with the perfect balance of not taking any rubbish? And when I say rubbish, I mean like manipulation, coercion, gaslighting, because those things are disgustingly common. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The statistics say that 10% of women experience obstetric violence. And as I mentioned before, there's, a 1 in 3 birth trauma rate. So that's way more common than it should be. And so do these support people know how to balance being a really strong, but also really team-oriented support? Are they able to advocate for you without bringing tension into the birth space? Because this balance is so, so important. Like, I can't even tell you how important. If you go even slightly too far onto one side of the spectrum, it can have a really detrimental impact on your experience. So yes, your partner, your mum, your friend, whoever, maybe they are an amazing support to you, and totally, maybe it would be great for them to be there, but that's not enough, and it doesn't complete your birth team. If they are not an expert in birth and they are not experienced with the system and deeply across all of these things that I've just mentioned, then there's some missing links. Which I think brings me to the next one that is so, so common, which is my partner wants to be my main support. Now, what I'm about to say might be really hard to hear. So I want you to just buckle up, put your seatbelt on and prepare yourself, okay? But let's just start somewhere a little bit gentle and positive. If your partner wants to be your main support system, in one sense, that's really beautiful, because it shows that he cares, he values you, this experience means a lot to him, and he holds it in a really high regard, which is amazing. And I'd honestly be quite heartbroken for you if he didn't feel that way, right? But having said that, and this is the hard thing to hear for a lot of people, if you are a partner who wants to be the main support, I want you to ask yourself this question, okay? Really be honest with yourself when you are thinking about this. Because if you're not going to answer this honestly, you're doing yourself and your baby mama a huge disservice, okay? So here's the question. Is it that you feel a little bit prideful and or a bit insecure? Do you feel like it's a little bit of a slap in the face that she wants a doula in the first place? Do you feel as though her even bringing this up means that you're not enough? Because if the thought of you guys hiring a doula, or what I've just said about, pride and insecurity, if that irks you, then I would gently say that it sounds like that's exactly what's at play. I think if that is happening and, you don't like when I say that, maybe you feel threatened by the prospect of someone else taking your place, or you feel threatened by the prospect of not being enough. And if that's you and you're like, oh my gosh, that is what I'm doing, I'm fully resisting the doula thing because I'm a bit insecure or I'm a bit prideful. First of all, I want to say to you, you are freaking amazing for admitting that to yourself, because a lot of men don't even have the guts to do that, and they won't admit that, which then costs the mum big time in her birth, big time. Because the layers of extra support that she needed on her birth team, she didn't have. And the reason that she didn't have them was because her partner was too insecure, prideful, arrogant, whatever, to accept that extra support that she needed, and that's a pretty awful thing to be submitting to and to be operating in when this woman is having your baby. She's bringing your baby into the world. So if that's you and you've gone, oh my gosh, I actually am, I'm buying into my own pride or my own insecurity, I just want to congratulate you for even getting that far and admitting that, because as I said, lots of men don't. The next thing I want to say is to kind of comfort you. A good doula will never, ever replace you. She won't even try to. She won't want to, right? Because you know that woman in a way that the doula doesn't, right? Just like the doula knows birth in a way that you don't. We can also acknowledge that, yeah, you know that woman the best. You know her more deeply than anyone. So how beautiful when partners and doulas can come together with this shared goal of improving the experience for that mama. And I will say, many of my clients over the years have wrestled with this, and the dads that have been in this place of oh, I don't want to be replaced, they are the ones that are the most convinced after the birth that everyone needs a doula. They are shouting it from the rooftops. because it also enhances the experience for the dads. Like now, he's not the only person bearing the weight of remembering everything and advocating for the woman. And, you know, if he needs to go and do a wee or get a snack or feed the dog or organize babysitting for the toddler, like you are still cared for. Also, the dads can zone in on the mum so much more because the doula is working in the background, you know, doing all the things so that now he won't have to. Whether that is like liaising with the midwives, setting up the room, providing advocacy, getting you and the mum snacks or water, reminding you of your options, helping you feel calm and confident, helping you navigate like different interventions or things that, you know, get suggested or offered as they come up. These things, like having a doula, benefits both of you is what I'm trying to say. I have never, ever in all my years had a dad say to me afterwards, oh my gosh, I was right. Having a doula really diluted the experience and we're never doing it again. It's just not happened. They have all said to me, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that we ended up hiring you. How wrong I was. Like, you made that 1,000 times better. I will never have a baby without a doula again. So, you know, I think that kind of just shows that, first of all, don't beat yourself up if you're like, oh my gosh, I was feeling a little bit insecure about not being enough, you know, and I did want to like be the main event. Having a doula helps you be a better support to the mum. It really does. And I think, a lot of the time, the dads are more present and they're more engaged when the doula's there because we're doing so much of the background work that would otherwise be taking you away from the mum. Then let's unpack another one that I hear a lot, which is that you just want it to be you and your partner and no one else. I mean, this one, look, unless you're having a free birth at home and it's like just the two of you in your shower with no midwife present, it won't be the two of you. So that's kind of a bizarre thing to say. Like, if anything, having a doula, as I said before, it makes it more intimate because the doula can liaise with the medical team and sort out all the admin and like all those random things so that you are being interrupted way less. The only thing that your doula cannot do and should not ever do for you is give or withhold consent on your behalf. Everything else we can do. So just as a fun example, one of the births that I recently attended, it was all going quite quickly. So there was no time really for any of the midwives to even need to ask for consent for anything because that baby just came. So pretty much all of the conversations and interactions with the midwives I could handle, right? So it's just things like, okay, where's her antenatal card? Does she have any allergies? What are her dietary restrictions? Tell me about the labour so far. Has she lost her mucus plug? What time did her waters break? Were the waters clear? Was there any meconium? Where's her birth plan? Does she want an active managed third stage or a physiological third stage? Oh, yep, she doesn't want students coming in. Okay, all good. Like all of those questions would have been interruptions for the couple, right? Like that's a lot of questions and there's so many more. That's just a few that I've kind of rattled off there. But the point is there are so many little interruptions throughout the labour, things that the midwives do need to know and need to find out so that they can, you know, help you and be on your team and give you the best experience and support your wishes. So all of those moments are moments that either, you know, your partner can be talking to the midwives, therefore not supporting you when you're in the middle of a contraction. Like you probably want them to be, as in you want your partner to be with you and helping you and supporting you and holding your hand and saying, you can do this, baby, doing so well. As opposed to like, she's allergic to penicillin, waters broke around 7 a.m., contractions really picked up at about lunchtime. You know, that's so annoying. I know that that's annoying because I have had 4 babies, as I've said, and all of my clients are like, yes, it's so annoying that we have to just be asked all of these questions. But these are necessary questions, you know? So having a doula is not going to take away from your intimacy. Like it makes things more intimate. And I feel like that little example there highlights that so beautifully. Like all those questions would have been interruptions, you know, but those are all things that I could organize. So they were far more present with one another than they would have been had they not had a doula. The other thing that I hear is like, oh, my partner's super informed. He's attended all the classes, read all the books. He's across it. And I think, again, the first aid course analogy just like debunks this perfectly. You know, in that intense moment, you're likely to forget some of the stuff. And I think, to even expand on that a little bit more, if let's say the first aid course is your birth class, right? Like a CPR course that you might do. That's the birth class. So you go and you do your birth class with your husband. That's the CPR course. But your doula has like a proper certificate for in first aid, right? I don't even know if that's a thing, if there is a certificate for in first aid. I'm fully just making this example up. So if it's not accurate, just like ignore me. But I feel like it's a helpful analogy. So I'm just going to say it. You'll know what I mean. Even if you're like, Ange, there is no certificate for first aid. Just bear with me and kind of hear my example that I'm trying to get to. So if you have done, this CPR course, that's your birth class. But then your doula has a certificate for in first aid, right? She is going to have more knowledge and training and experience up her sleeve because she has gone even deeper than that birth class. And, I kind of touched on this before, like your doula, if you have hired, an experienced one, she has been around many, 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 many births. And, so she can help you. She knows what positions to get into, what positions to avoid, if you're having double peaking contractions, if you're having contractions that are like, really long. Sometimes you'll hear women say, oh my gosh, yay, that contraction went for like 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Great, yay, yay, yay. No, not yay, yay, yay. That tells me baby's in a bit of a weird position. Like, that's a problem, And how's your partner supposed to know that? Like, it's not his job. It's not his area of expertise. It's the same thing as, like, literally, this is another little example. My husband and I were talking last night about looking for an accountant. I was like, babe, let's, find a great accountant because we now, are managing, I've got this business and we've got a property. And so it's just that little bit more complicated now, like our taxes and stuff. And I said to him, let's hire an accountant. He didn't say to me, oh my gosh, how could you suggest that? I am the family accountant. I'm decent at tax and I know numbers and I can sit down and do our taxes. No, he acknowledges that, he is an expert at what he is an expert at. And you cannot be a master of all trades, right? The saying goes, if you're a jack of all trades, you're a master of none. So let your husband be the master at being your husband, but he's not the master at birth. He's just not. Unless your husband is literally a midwife, maybe then it's different. But for the most part, I think, it's important to not think that oh, my husband's pretty informed. I'm sure there are gaps in his knowledge, and while he's an expert in you as a person and he is probably, the best person to be supporting you emotionally, there are certainly going to be missing links that could have otherwise been avoided had you had a doula as well. I feel like this also is a good kind of segue into the doula versus midwife thing, okay? And it's not doula versus midwife. I'll explain why. I think a lot of people kind of get this mixed up and there's this common idea that I don't need a doula because I have a midwife. And the doula is just the same as a midwife. If you've got one, you don't need the other. Let's talk about this one because it could not be further from the truth, right? Doulas and midwives are completely different, so different. A midwife is a medical birth professional. She is there for the medical safety, the clinical safety of you and your baby. That's her expertise. That's her priority. Whereas the doula is a birth professional too, but a different birth professional, right? Our role is not medical. We are focused on birth as a natural physiological process, not a medical one. We provide support in the form of information, advocacy, comfort measures. We help you navigate different challenges that come up. Let's say, I talked about before, if the baby's in a bit of a weird position, right? We can pick up on that and we can address that. Midwives very often don't have the capacity or the time for that. They cannot be doing hip squeezes for you for 18 hours straight. They can't be getting you into all the right positions. They can't coach you through every phase of labor or breathe with you through every contraction. They can't hold the shower head on your back and one on your tummy for 6 hours straight. They can't, continuously make sure that you're drinking water in between contractions and that you're fed and help you test out all the different comfort measures, encouraging you endlessly, working through your emotional and mental blocks when they come up. And they do come up, right? Birth cracks you open. There's lots of emotional and mental things that come up. But you get the idea, right? Their focus is the clinical, medical side of things. And so that's why doulas and midwives make the most beautiful teams, because we complement one another. Our roles are like perfectly complementary. I have so many incredible midwife friends who I dearly love and who I respect so much. And I feel like we are these power teams. It's like a little yin and yang combo, right? Like we are different. We complement one another beautifully, and one can never replace the other one because we're different, right? Let's also chat a little bit about MGP, because this is a big one too that I hear. Like, oh, I don't need a doula. I've already got continuity. I'm in the MGP program, or I have a private obstetrician who's going to be on call for me. The problem with this is, and I mean, if we speak in particular about the MGP program. So if you don't know, MGP stands for Midwifery Group Practice, and it's a program most women will apply for it. Lots of women apply for it, but very few get in because it's a relatively underfunded program. There's not much funding for it, not much availability. But how it works is that you would be essentially like assigned to a midwife that you would see throughout your pregnancy. So all of your antenatal appointments, you've got the same midwife, which is beautiful because you develop like a real sense of trust, and you build rapport, and you build such a beautiful relationship. And then that midwife is usually on call for you for your birth, right? And they also see you postnatally. But here's the problem with that mindset of like, I don't need a doula because I'm in the MGP. Midwives, as in MGP midwives, yes, they're on call for you some of the time, but not all of the time, right? They have certain days that they're not on call. And then the days that they are on call for you, there are times usually in those days that they're also not on call for you, or they don't have the like on call phone switched on or whatever. And this happens honestly more often than you may think. The goal is definitely for them to attend your birth, and lots of the time they do, for sure. Like, I'm not denying that, but it's definitely not guaranteed. I think it's a bit of a dangerous misconception. People think like, oh yep, I'm in the MGP, so I'm absolutely having my midwife at my birth. You might not. Like, it's not guaranteed. A doula is pretty much, I mean, unless you're having, like a private midwife attend a home birth, they are on call for you, similar to a doula, right? It's like 24/7. And again, it can depend on the provider. The ones that I know are like the doulas, they are on call 24/7. Doesn't matter what time of day you go into labor, and it doesn't matter what day you go into labor. They are on call for you for weeks on either side of your due date. That's how I work. That's how most doulas work. So we are so much more guaranteed to attend your birth. I have never missed a birth in my 5 years doing this work. I've never, ever, ever missed a birth. And I think that's because I'm really strict about how many women each month I take on. I know some doulas take on 10 women a month or something crazy. And it's like, wow, that's really risky. The odds of you missing a birth, that feels like pretty high odds to me. So I take on literally no more ever than 3 or 4 women a month. That's my absolute limit. And so that has meant that I've never missed a birth. I'm also just extremely dedicated. Like, I think you would have to literally tie me down. I'd have to be in a coma, like seriously, completely unconscious before I would miss a birth. But yeah, I think just be careful if you are thinking, oh, I'm in the MGP, so I don't need a doula. The other thing too to consider is that like your MGP midwife, even let's say she's on call, you happen to go into labor at the perfect time, she's on call, she makes it. Your MGP midwife still works for the hospital. She's not independent. So yes, I'm sure that she has your best interests at heart, 100%. Most midwives are absolutely stunning. They're beautiful, amazing human beings. But they work in a system that has a lot of pressure. They have ridiculous policies that they are pressured to follow and to adhere to, policies that are very often not evidence-based. There's research that shows that it takes up to 17 years for evidence to then translate into hospital policy. And, the midwife might know that it's not evidence-based, what she's pushing and what she's suggesting. One tiny example of this is that, there's this recommendation that if the placenta is not born within sort of 15 minutes or so after you give birth, they recommend a syntocinin injection to encourage the placenta to come out. So that would be called an active managed third stage, versus a physiological third stage is when we just wait for the placenta to kind of come out on its own. Now, a lot of hospitals will say, oh, if the placenta hasn't come out after 15 minutes, we better give you an injection. That's not evidence-based. The evidence says that anything up to an hour is absolutely fine. That's what the evidence says. So why then is the hospital policy 15 minutes, right? And I'm kind of, going into a different topic here, but I think it's these little things that you have to be mindful of. Like, your MGP midwife might be incredible and beautiful and very supportive, but they have to make suggestions that are not necessarily evidence-based, whereas a doula can help you ask the right questions, can help you, weigh up your pros and cons, figure out what is and isn't going to benefit you. And of course, doulas never give medical advice. That's totally not our scope. And we also never pressure you. Like, if you want the injection to make your placenta come out immediately, then girlfriend, you have that injection, right? So it's not about taking away your autonomy or your choice. It's giving you choice that, quite frankly and quite commonly, the hospital system takes away from you. So look, it's just something to think about. Then let's kind of just touch on the last one when it comes to providers, midwives, whatever. And this is that red flag thing that I kind of mentioned before. If you are told by your care provider, doulas kind of make things a bit complicated. Sometimes they're a little bit difficult to work with. I'll be really supportive. You don't need a doula. That to me is an absolutely massive, fluoro, giant, just insane red flag. Big, big, big red flag. You have to ask yourself, if your provider is talking like that and they're saying, yeah, look, I don't really recommend that you work with a doula. I don't think it's necessary. I wouldn't really recommend that. Or even if they go so far as to advise against that, I would be packing my bags and changing providers literally faster than you can say, what the heck is wrong with you? Because that is so problematic. You have to ask yourself, what is it that they are against about you having a doula? Like, what do doulas stand for, right? We stand for advocating for you. We stand for making sure that your wishes and your preferences are respected and upheld. We make sure that informed consent happens. We, explain your options to you. Like, if there is a care provider that is anti that, also knowing that the research literally proves that doulas improve birth outcomes, any care provider that is anti you having a doula, I would not want them anywhere near me when I'm giving birth. Like, I would literally change care providers instantly. If someone said that to me, instantly I would change care providers. Whether or not you end up hiring the doula is almost irrelevant at that point. It is the fact that they are pushing against you having someone who is independently hired by you to advocate for you. If they have a problem with that, you should have a problem with them. I cannot emphasize that enough. So seriously, be very careful. If you're hearing language like that, it's not necessary, you won't need that, I'm going to support you. Big red flag. Big, big, big. So yeah, just wanted to call that one out because it's really not ideal. And then I think lastly, let's just chat a little bit about the cost, right? There's a lot of people out there who are like, oh my gosh, a doula is such a luxury. They're not a necessity. They're just too expensive. And look, they're not going to really change your birth outcomes. You can't control birth, so it's not really worth the investment. Okay, that's not true. Doulas do change your birth outcomes. The research proves it. Again, I'll kind of read out the list of benefits because I think it's kind of helpful to know what actually are these benefits that Angie keeps harping on about. So I'll read those in a second. But honestly, I think the massive change in outcomes, in my opinion, should make doulas a necessity. And I would go so far as to say that the outcomes that doulas provide are priceless, right? You almost can't put a value on them. And I know that's a really big statement. And I know that doulas, they are a very significant investment. I get that. But yeah, absolutely. I think doulas are a priceless investment. I think they're an essential investment. And, I think if you are someone who has experienced yourself or has walked closely with someone else who's experienced birth trauma, again, 33% of women do experience this, then you'll know how priceless birth support is and how worthwhile it is to invest in. But let's go over some of the outcomes and some of the kind of benefits of having a doula that the research shows so that you can really see kind of what the what the need is for this and why I harp on and on and on about it, okay? Here are the benefits. And as always, the references are provided in the email that goes along with this podcast episode. So if you would like to see a full list of references, be sure to get on the mailing list, which you can do through my website. All right, let's just read these benefits out. I'm just going to read them kind of in no particular order. So doula support has been proven to provide the following improved birth outcomes: 50% reduction in the rate of cesarean sections, 25% shorter labours, 60% reduction in epidural requests, 40% reduction in the use of synthetic oxytocin, so Syntocin, and that is the drug that's in the injection that I spoke about before to make the placenta come out, and it's also the drug that is used in a medical induction of labour. Doulas also show the benefit of fewer birth complications, higher APGAR scores for babies. So an APGAR score is essentially like a measure of baby's condition post-birth. So better APGAR score means that like babies are in better nick after birth. Babies are 4 times less likely to have low birth weight issues, 40% reduction in the use of forceps or vacuums for delivery, improved breastfeeding outcomes, decreased incidence of postpartum depression, that is massive. Better mother-infant bonding and interaction, reduced need for clinical procedures overall, earlier onset of lactogenesis, which is basically just a fancy way of saying milk production and secretion. Mothers are less likely to rate their childbirth experience negatively, and as well a 30% reduction in analgesia use. So that's essentially like pain relief, right? So yeah, that's some of the benefits to having a doula. I think they are very significant and that it would massively warrant hiring one. As I said before, I would literally never give birth without a doula again. I've done it before. It was not good. Learn from my mistakes, please. And hire a doula. I'm going to park it there. That is a big list of some of the common misconceptions that I hear around doulas and around doula support. I hope that it was thought-provoking and that I debunked a couple of myths if you were believing any of those. Yeah, hopefully that was helpful. Please share that with any pregnant friends that you have if you think, that it could benefit them. I do want to get into this announcement though, because I'm so excited to tell you about it. Okay, this is the first time actually that I'm properly announcing this. If you're on my mailing list, you'll kind of already know what's up. But because I always announce things to my mailing list mamas first. But yes, I am now putting it out to the rest of the world. So I've been working really hard on a few different things over the last few weeks, but one of them is now all official and ready to be announced, and that is that I am hosting a live workshop over Zoom all about how you can have an empowering, positive, natural birth experience. I feel like the number one question that I get asked is like this. It's how do I, make this happen in a world that over-medicalizes birth and where a cascade of intervention is so common, where birth trauma is so common. Like, how do I beat the odds and have a natural birth, an intervention-free birth, or, like a low intervention birth that I absolutely love and that I feel so empowered by? I get that question seriously all the time. And if you have that question too, then this is for you. This workshop is for you. It's going to be super in-depth. It'll be an hour of very solid teaching. It's going to be super, super packed with all sorts of very practical tips and tricks. Basically the exact blueprint that I teach my clients, which I might just toot my own horn for a second here and say that it's a very effective blueprint. This kind of system or these tips have seriously gotten great results for so many beautiful women that I've worked with. So I'm so excited to be bringing this to you because I just know how much of a difference it's going to make in your birth. Even if you are a doula or a midwife or anyone at all who works with birthing women or works kind of in and around the birth space, you'll get heaps out of this. So the details are that it will be on Thursday, the 21st of November at 7:30 p.m. I kind of thought for those mamas who are second, third, fourth, fifth, 10th, whatever time mamas, it would be nice to do it kind of in the evening so that you can get your little ones to bed, or even for first time mums, if you are working full time, whatever. I just thought an evening is a time that kind of suits most people. So it will be on the 21st of November at 7:30 p.m. until 8:30 p.m. for the workshop. Then you can buy a VIP ticket, which will get you access to a live Q&A that will run directly after the workshop, and you can bring all your questions and listen to me answer everyone else's questions too, so you'll get your own questions answered. And then even I think there's always so much value in kind of listening to other people's questions, because so often you go, oh my gosh, yeah, great question, like I want to know about that too. So that'll be really good. And then the VIP ticket also includes a value-packed workbook. You guys might have seen the workbook that I kind of go through with my clients in person, so this is kind of a very similar one to that. I have put it together. It's got lots of little bonuses and activities, so you can take everything that you learn even deeper. And so that VIP ticket is $150. Or if you want a ticket just to the workshop only and you don't want the workbook and you don't want to stay for the live Q&A, then just the workshop on its own is $100. But I've decided to do a little cheeky like early bird deal, because I love a discount. I feel like everyone loves a discount. So you can get the VIP ticket for $130 and then the standard ticket for $80 if you grab your ticket anytime this week. So from today until next Monday, there's that early bird offer, but then as of next week, Monday, the tickets will go up to full price. So get in quick if you're keen and if you love a discount. All the details will be on my website as well at the time that this podcast goes out to the world. And I'll also send out an email with some information too and the link to get your tickets. So make sure that you are on the mailing list so that you don't miss that. But yeah, that's it for now. I'm so excited for this workshop. I just know that it's going to be so beneficial to you. I have so many things to share with you and to just go really in depth. So I can't wait. But I will leave it at that for now because this episode's getting really long. As always, thank you so much for listening and for being here. I just love helping women have the best birth experiences possible. So thank you for listening. It's such a joy to serve you and help you. And I'll see you back here next week with a new episode. Thanks for joining us for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a rating or a comment, and I can't wait to see you back here for the next one.